very good evening to everyone present here. We extend our heartfelt gratitude to all of you for joining us today for this panel discussion on job shadowing organized by the Finance Club of the Placement Cell, Shriram College of Commerce. I, Shravan Jaiswal, along with Gautam Bhansali, shall be the moderators for today's session. Finance remains one of the most preferred job profiles not only at SRCC but colleges all across the globe. With the increasing economic growth and technological developments, niche areas of finance like investment banking, private equity, and venture capital have come up. However, there seems much ambiguity about the same. Today's discussion will be focused on doing just that, that is, guiding the attendees on these various domains of finance. We are delighted to have with us four of our distinguished alumni who shall be sharing their valuable insights with us. Mr. G. Harishankar, from the graduating batch of 2017, is currently working as an associate with the prestigious private equity firm Warburg Pincus LLC. He has previously worked as a business analyst with McKinsey & Co. During his undergraduate, he was a member of the Dramatic Society and interned with Citibank, along with being the recipient of the Mitsubishi UFJ Foundation Scholarship. We welcome you, sir. Mr. Jaydeep Maan, from the graduating batch of 2017, is currently working as an investment analyst with the private equity firm L. Catterton, having previously worked with Rothschild & Co. and Deutsche Bank. While in SRCC, he acted as the director of Project Sattva of Enactus SRCC. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you. Looking forward to the session.
We next have Ms. Shubhangi Agarwal from the graduating batch of 2019, is currently working as an investment banking analyst with JP Morgan Chase & Company. During her undergraduate, she held positions as the secretary of the placement cell. We welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Gautam.
Ms. Arushi Jain from the graduating batch of 2017 is currently working as an investment analyst with Sequoia Capital, a renowned venture capital firm. She has previously worked with Bertelsmann India Investments and Barclays. She held positions of responsibilities with the Economic Society and Connecting Dreams Foundation during her undergraduate. We welcome you, ma'am.
Thanks a lot, guys. Look forward to this.
We shall now be moving on with the questions. The first question that we have is, what is investment banking, private equity, and venture capital? How is one field different from the other two?
Sure. So for me, I have more experience on the IB and VC side, so I'll probably cover that, and would depend on the others for the rest. So how I see it is that if you see the deal process of any company, or how you see the fundraising process for any startup, the life cycle in the journey is that you basically start a company, you may or may not want to raise funds. If you want to raise funds, then you have particular different stages. Now, when you go ahead in the market and want to raise funds, at that time, the first thing typically that you would do is to hire a banker, which is where IB comes in. You hire an investment banker. They help you around with the entire process, whether it's creating the right collaterals, connecting you to the right investors. They could help you in understanding the market better at times, and any other help that you need with the fundraise process, right? On the other side of the transaction lie the VC and the PE guys. If you're raising at a earlier stage, which is, let's say, like a series A, B, C, up till, let's say, D. Now the lines are blurring in that sense. But yeah, typically until then, you would reach out to a venture capital fund because they invest in earlier stage startups. And if you're going further than that, then you start approaching private equity firms as well. So that's sort of the overall way how you should look at what these funds or these the banks actually do. Now within that, like, there's of course a lot of nuances which you can cover throughout the conversation. I'll let the other people speak a little more about their respective fields.
So I think as we start off initially, there are types of VCs as well which exist, and Arushi can add to the depth of it. But I think there are angel investors who primarily are large wealthy Indians or foreigners who want to invest in early stage opportunities in India. There are like early VCs, like for example, Matrix and even Sequoia, I believe, has a early stage fund who put in small A, B, C type of investments, probably not C. But those type of investments, these will be smaller checks, and still there will be some sort of an ignition capital to get people to start up. And then comes the later stage of growth investing, wherein, as Arushi said, the lines are a bit blurry because there are investors like the likes of Sequoia and large VCs like Axel who invest. And there are also growth investors like Warburg and I believe Carterton also to an extent in that bucket, right? And then we move on to the last stage, which is the type of buyout or completely financial transaction based ownership that one looks at. And there the players like Blackstone and the like of an Apax would come in, who would buy a company which is mature in its stage and enjoy the cash flows. Uh, so those are the types. I would just add a couple of other names to that list. One would be a public market investor, would typically come in once the company has, after all these stages or somewhere in this stage, gone public, and then an investor coming in there. And there could be other financially savvy investors like a hedge fund, etc., as well, which we can probably leave for today. Yeah.
An additional thing which also an investment bank does is about the mergers and acquisition space, which is slightly different from what a PE, which obviously a lot of things are different, but something which PE are not at all involved in. Basically, in a way to draw a relation between an IB and PE will be that an IB actually assists a PE when they are looking to acquire a small company, or probably they're planning to divest a company from their portfolio. So I think this is something additional as to what an IB usually does. And obviously there's a lot of, it also provides other corporate finance services such as raising debt and refinancing debt. So there are some other functions which an IB helps the company as well.
Just to sort of add on to that, talking about it from a very simplistic perspective, an investment bank is nothing but a facilitator of transactions. And that can be across early stage, that can be across late stage. And now within that, there are multiple ways to cut it. So for example, the first cut, I think, is what Arushi touched upon when we talk about the transaction sizes or the ticket sizes. So one way to cut it is there are certain niche investment banks which particularly look into the startup ecosystem. And these are the likes of vendors who are mostly focused on the technology aspect of technology sectors in India, startup ecosystem, etc. The second way to cut it would be talking about the bulge bracket investment banks, which most of them would actually come to SRCC, the likes of Deutsche, the likes of Citi, Barclays, etc. And they actually deal with less of the startup and fundraising stuff, and more with strategic M&A, and maybe in some cases exits of private equities. So I think that would also be another, add-on to whatever the three of them said.
Thank you for your words of wisdom. Moving on, why did you decide to go for this particular field? Additionally, what skills do investment banking, private equity, and venture capital teach you?
Honestly, when I was in college, I didn't decide that I want to work in an IB or in finance, to be very honest, because actually at an undergrad level, you take what you get. But I think after working in an IB for 2 years, I think now I can tell you that why I would like to continue in this field of in the field of finance or IB. It's basically because I think when I joined initially, every day I was learning at least 6 to 7 days at an average, a new thing at an average I was learning every day. So actually that is the entire beauty of finance, that you get to learn a lot of different things. You get to learn so many different things on a vast variety of topics. And this not just includes your financial knowledge, but also a lot of your modeling understanding, and also the industry that you're working in. So like I'm aligned to the technology space. So I get an opportunity to learn more about this entire space in greater depth. So I think this is what is very interesting. And I think this is why I like this field, and I would like to further on continue with it. And and whenever there is a deal that's taking place, I think there's this whole madness that's happening, that you are constantly creating several decks, and then you're constantly getting repeated comments on it, and you're converting them again and again, and then when you actually finally execute the deal, I think that happiness and the satisfaction you get, I think it's all worth the hard work you do for various months and years that goes on actually executing a deal. So yeah, I will hand it over to the other panelists.
In my case, there was definitely an inclination towards doing a certain thing. Of course, while we sit for campus placements, it wouldn't make logical sense to just sit for a few companies or a specific category and sit out of the other ones. So in my case, I had a clear preference over banking than consulting, and luckily it worked out for me. And that was primarily driven by some academic interest in the core subjects of, say, financial mathematics or accounting, and generally curiosity about learning more about businesses as such. Answering the second question with respect to the key learnings, I think when it comes to banking, in fact, let's talk about banking first. There are two primarily work streams that happen. Either you're going to work on marketing, or either you're going to work on transactions. Similarly, on the investing side, again, two work streams happen. Either you work on the portfolio, or you work on evaluating new transactions. Talk about banking first. I think generally banking is more of a horizon where there is a lot of breadth to cover, but the actual depth you go into is relatively lesser. So in other words, I spent most of my career in investment banking. I only have recently made the switch to private equity. But during these 2-3 years, I've worked on multiple sectors across consumer and retail, across tech, across infrastructure, airports, power, utilities. So therefore, the kind of sectoral exposure I've got is a lot. However, the depth required within each of those sectors has been more at a private equity firm. So despite of the fact that I've only spent a month or two at El Carreton, and we're only covering a few niche sectors now, particularly focusing on consumer tech, but the level of knowledge and skill set that we end up developing in one particular sector within the investing industry is much higher than that of, say, an investment.
No, so I think for me, it was a bit different in the sense that when I had come out of college, I had taken a cognizant decision that I did not want to do banking and wanted to do consulting because I sucked at finance, and I did not I felt that I was more inclined towards the business side of things than the finance side of things. So, but having spent a couple of years, I think why I switched to private equity, 3 reasons. One, I would say the type of skill set that it adds is which I missed at consulting, is that you have real skin in the game. You are actively deploying money, and unlike in probably a consulting where you are advising. So that's one major difference which appealed a lot to me. Does not to a lot of people. That's one. The second thing was I felt that the real skill that it gave me as to how to invest was also a very personal skill that I would like to build across my career. Right? If you want to go to any type of entrepreneurial role, or in terms of public role, anything that you do, just having a handle on how to make money out of money make a lot of difference is that's the hypothesis I had. And third, it pays well. So I of course wanted to move ahead on that terms as well. So those were the sort of 3 reasons why I went back on sort of my decision to prioritize managerial skills over finance and came back.
In college, when I chose banking initially, I didn't have it figured out. I was honestly going after whatever. I tried for consulting. No shame in admitting I didn't get through. But Barclays sort of came along, thought that, up until then, I was not thinking about IB at all, to be honest, because of all the stories you hear. But having left with no choice in a way, I was determined that, hey, okay, let's try this out. If you don't like it, worst case, you can switch, right? So I went in with that perspective. But having said that, I think IB teaches you so much discipline in your life, just to be on your toes, gives you all the tools that you would need, honestly, further in your career. By the end, I had it figured out that, hey, I like this job, etc. But like I said, yeah. So for a better life, and secondly, like Hari mentioned, that to have a little more skin in the game, I felt like moving to the investing side sort of makes a little more sense. And also the thrill of interacting with the founders themselves, the thrill of building the company along with them, the thrill of finding out exactly how they think. How do you build a company? Like any one of us could go ahead and start something of our own, but how do you really develop it into a bigger company, something that people actually find value in, something that adds more to the society than it started with, right? And I think a business is all about that you get more out of it than whatever you put inside. So all that was very exciting for me. And honestly, in banking, that was kind of limited. I was doing more a representation of what the businesses were on a superficial level, but not really understanding what was happening there. So that's why I sort of tried to, like, made the switch. Now again, between PE and VC, how I decided was that I like more energy driven, more like faster paced things. And in PE, unfortunately, that wasn't being satisfied. Like, deals take a lot more time, especially because they're much larger deals and the companies are much more financially advanced. They figured out how to make money, and that is how they're scaling. So that was exciting for me, and that's how I sort of chose a VC over PE at that time. Now the learnings from all of them, I think, covered IB part. VC is definitely to think more big picture, to be able to not value something for what it is right now, but for what it can become. To be able to understand people, that, I mean, again, still learning that, haven't figured that out, but to judge whether somebody can actually create a successful business or no, in a way. Are they able to lead people? Are they able to take the right decisions in a pressure situation, etc.? So all of those things you actually learn in a VC environment.
Yeah, so I think if I take a giant step back, things that helped what in SRCC were landing a job, because I don't see myself getting into private equity directly from any other place than, let's say, an IB or a VC, so or a IB or a consulting role. So that's one. The second thing I think for me was the number of things that I did actually in college. So the number of societies I was in a leadership / working position in, which helped me to handle multiple things, which I think which helped me during my consulting period, and hence helped me to get into B.
Again, I don't think that I don't think most of us do anything very much out of the box, honestly. It's just that some things work out, some things don't. But I think something which every undergrad student should have if they're actually targeting a job, let's say at a top tier investment bank or consulting or a PVC, is at least at the undergrad level, it's important that you have an internship. It's very important. I mean, not having an internship, I feel, is a killer, because it's like a straight up point that you get that, okay, this person has done an internship, this person hasn't. So, even if, and it does not matter that you get the best internship on campus, the best paying internship on campus. Even if, let's say, you don't make it in campus, you apply off campus, but just do an internship. I think it's so important. You should at least have one, and if you have two, that's just a bonus. And other than that, I think most of the top firms, like, I don't know, like many, like even when I joined SRCC, I think somewhere the narrative was that you should give importance to the extracurricular activities, participate in sports, in societies. Academics is something that can be managed. But I think that when it comes to shortlisting, you need to have a decent academic record. I don't think it is stressed enough how much a decent academic record can make the difference between getting shortlisted and not getting shortlisted. So I think these two things are pretty important. And I think, like Hari mentioned, you participate in various things in society, in a college, that really helps you shape your personality in great ways. And in a way, it shows the interviewer that, you're not a laxed person. You like to do things. If you're given 10 things, you'll be able to do it. You will not be thrown off guard. So I think it's a good practice to be a part of multiple societies and all that stuff, I think.
Arushi, if I may. So we can approach this in sort of two parts. So firstly, I think the first question is, what is going to help you get shortlisted, get that interview call? And then the next step would be, what is going to help you clear the interview rounds? I think to tackle the first point, I think Shubhangi perfectly summed it up. The two very important points, academics, I completely agree with her, are very important. And unfortunately, they're not stressed enough. But believe us, focus on your academics. Secondly, yes, internship is obviously important, but I don't think anyone, usually struggles with that point, that aspect of it. I think more important is after you get that short list, what to sort of the key sort of takeaways I have with my interviewing experience in general and sort of just looking at the other peers around. One common misconception, I think, in my opinion, is that you need to have something which sort of correlates, say, what you've done with you wanting a finance job. So, in other words, what I mean to say is even if you've done dramatics, even if you've done music, dance, that is definitely not going to stop you from getting an IB or a PEVC job. So I think the key over here is that interviewers, what my sense is that they look for something you can talk about very passionately in your interviews. Now that can be any activity you do, that can be any position of responsibility you have, that can be any social work you do, that can be an enormous achievement in sports, music, anything. But I think the key here is to how do you present that experience of your life in that interview so that the interviewer feels that, okay, this person deserves to get a shot, because naturally they understand that you've never worked in the industry before and they're certainly not going to judge you on that. So I think apart from academic rigor, apart from your internship experience, the key is to position your key experiences in your life in such a manner then say that, sort of you come across as a very passionate person who likes to do certain things that would complement your on-the-job performance.
I just like to add one thing to what Jaideep said, that that you don't have a prior experience, so don't expect you to know things. And I think it's very true. Most of the times when you're interviewing for a company, like let's say, like even when I was interviewing for JP, I was so scared that I don't have a CFA, I don't know anything in finance, I will not get selected. But that's the thing. I think it's only in consulting that they expect you to know some sort of case, not some, a lot of case. You need to know how to solve cases. But in any other job, I don't think it's important that you know anything about it. Like if you've done a CFA, you better know what is in that CFA, what you've done in that CFA. But if you've not done, you just need to show that whatever I've done it fully. That's it.
In addition to Hari's points, I would say that multitasking is, I can't stress that enough on how much multitasking in college actually prepares you for the real world. In addition to that, I would say that for me, at least, developing a thick skin was something that I got only in college. I think before that, you don't really, you're in such a protected environment when you're in school that you really don't get all that exposure to how people can be, and just filtering out the opinions that you should be taking and things that you shouldn't be. Because at times, valuable feedback that you get from your seniors is something you should be really taking forward. But then you also need to understand what to prioritize in that feedback.
Thank you, everyone. That was indeed very insightful. Moving on, could you tell us about a typical day in the life of an investment banker, venture capitalist, private equity investor, and what does it look like? Additionally, what kind of mindset is required for the same?
So yeah, in IB, I think obviously the broader picture is that, as I pointed out before, there are two types of work streams which sort of happen. So the key takeaway is that your on day-to-day sort of work schedule or work sort of plan is very contingent on what phase of the project or any transaction you are actually a part of. So usually in investment banks, what happens is that there are multiple deal teams that are divided who are responsible for executing each and every project. And within each and every investment bank, obviously, there are multiple teams which have sort of a sector-specific focus. Now, on an average, I think Arushi and Shubhangi can obviously elaborate on this further. But in my experience, at any point of time, you're definitely always staffed on at least 2 to 3 live transactions which are happening at one point of time. Now, obviously, these transactions are happening at different levels of intensities, but certainly they are in your sort of to-do list on a daily basis. Now, so putting the transaction bit on hold for now, the other major component of the day-to-day work of any investment banking job is your pitch work or the marketing-oriented work. And that is nothing but preparing presentations and doing analysis on Excel pertaining to financials of different companies, putting them together and to certainly tweaking it in such a manner that you want to convey a specific message as an investment bank. And this is the message that I finally want to convey. So I think generally, if you're not doing deal work, you're in any day, your 6 to 7 hours per day is definitely going to go in making that presentation on a daily basis, be it a PPT or be it an Excel. And even from a marketing perspective, I think on an average, if there is a very lean period, I think you're definitely going to be doing at least 2 to 3 pitches per week. And if it's a very, very active industry, or if the market is really hot at any point of time, then it can go as high as 2 to 3 meetings on a daily basis. So I think that would be 60 to 70% of my job in the IB industry. The balance, say 30 to 40 or 20% or whatever remains, is actually the on deal related experience. And again, a lot of variations within that, because if the deal is actually picking up, then there are no limit to the number of hours that you can actually spend on it. Because unfortunately, the problem or one of the limitations with banking is that it's a very client driven industry. In investing, ultimately, we are the ones who are taking the shots and deploying the capital. However, in case of investment banks, we're answerable to clients who operate on a different deadline, sort of schedules and deadlines. So therefore, we are given certain deadlines, by which we're supposed to say release materials or to send across an analysis. And usually you will realize that everyone in the organization is extremely busy, and it's only the night before or the day before that thing actually gets, started or checked on. So in that scenario, obviously there are multiple all-nighters you're going to pull off. And I think this is my take on banking. I think Hari and Arushi would be able to explain better from an investing perspective.
For a VC analyst, things are a lot better. I mean, for me, I've seen the change in my life from IB to VC, but it has its own, it has its own kind of pressure. So in IB, things are very structured for you. Like, you know what the deliverable is, you know what exactly the output should look like. And in a lot of ways, you don't have to do much of the thinking. At least that was the case in my job. In VC, they hire you to be able to think, right? You're supposed to figure out how you should diligence a company, because in most cases you will start off in a completely new space where there is no literature to read. There is hardly any people who are like already working, so they can give you some gyan, etc. Of course, you get piecemeal gyan from different people, but I think it's a very unstructured environment. So the ability to think and form opinions is the first thing that is needed, and that is what causes most of the change in the work style that happens. Now, coming to exactly what you do during the day, it could be anything from, let's say, speaking to different experts to figure out what the size of the market can look like, to understanding what are the competitors doing, what are they doing differently than the particular company you're evaluating. It can be just evaluate for a growth stage startup. So I work with the growth team at my firm, which looks at Series B plus sort of investments, not earlier stage. So we do have some form of data available, let's say 1 or 2 years of data that the company has already been operating for. So, some kind of analysis goes on the Excel side, like you try and understand what the growth trends are looking like, cohorts, etc. So let me not get into the details. So basically, just understanding the numbers of the company. And then it could be very dynamic in terms of what you're trying to diligence for the particular company. It could be customer calls, it could be references from the industry. So no 2 days are the same. And apart from so this was all around the evaluation. Apart from that, you do a lot of work with your portfolio companies. So you will typically be assigned a few companies that you work closely with. Now, whatever the founder or the management team needs help with, you will help them with that. It could be, let's say they're looking for a new M&A target. So you'll speak to a couple of companies, introduce them to the management team. It could be in terms of, let's say they want to rehash their reporting. It could be a new market that they want to study. So they will want you to do the initial work and present it to them. So it can be any kind of support to your particular portfolio company that you're handling. Apart from that, then you do a lot of in-fund activities. It could be in terms of just evaluating what kind of returns we're making and what is the next set of companies we should be looking at. It could be creating sector thesis. It could be just strategizing in terms of evaluation. Are we making a mistake? How are we doing things, etc. So very, very fund-related activities, just internally evaluating how we are doing, right? So all of these things as an analyst you are involved in.
I think as Arushi covered, that's investing has a certain set of activities where we are trying to analyze whether a particular target is good enough to invest or not, and whether we can put in our money in that or not. It's just that the type of work that Arushi mentioned about VC is much more trying to build something which does not exist and trying to predict the future. Apparently, basically in private equity also, you would want to do the same thing, which is try to predict the future so as to understand whether you will be able to make a return out of it or not. But 50% of the work on analysis in a private equity sphere would be backward looking to understand that since an organization has been existent for a certain number of years, whether its historic performance justifies its future performance or not. So that is sort of a lot of stuff that we end up doing, which is about 50 to 60% of my time would probably go into historical analysis, on financials, on legal issues, etc. That the company is facing, commercial diligence, which includes everything around competitors, how the company has performed, what its brand position is, etc. Right? And then we try to project out. That's the next 20 to 30% of the work that I do, which is on an Excel, just sitting out and trying to project whether what does all the information that we have synthesized for it currently translates into numbers in the future, right? So that's the second thing that we end up doing, and this is where the Excel modeling, it actually sounds very fancy. It's not a very sophisticated model that we run around, but yeah, so that's the second part of stuff that we do. The third type of thing that we do, which is broadly 10 to 20% of our work, is around managing the companies that we own. So for example, Warburg has about 30 portfolio companies. So we spend a lot of time in trying to understand how they are performing, to track their performance against the futuristic plan that we made. And then we try to understand now how to exit them, because you make money only when you realize cash, right? So how do you exit? How we think of whether we want to get an investment banker at the right time or not, whether we want to get a commercial guy in for turning around the company, etc. So that's the rest of the 20%. As probably where the line between VC and P differs is we end up meeting a lot less entrepreneurs because most of the opportunities that come to us are not greenfield, but are more like investment banking driven processes which come to us. So in that matter, I think that's a big difference.
Thank you for sharing your views. Moving ahead, how can one get into this field? What are the various entry modes?
So I can talk about investment banking. So I'll talk about it from the undergrad level. So mostly the kind of opportunities that we get at our campus are not so basically in India, investment bank is of two types. Basically, there is a back-end bank and there is a front-end bank. So most of the roles that come to SRCC, for hiring, for that matter to any undergrad college, are mostly the back-end roles, and there are only a few front-end roles that actually come to undergrad colleges, for the simple reason that the demand for front-end analysts is pretty limited, and if they want to fulfill that requirement, they mostly go to the top IIMs and they get their analyst batch from there. And for the back-end roles, they come to premier institutes and like SRCC, IITs, BITS, and all that colleges. So the first and the very obvious entry point will definitely be from your undergrad college. And it is I think the easiest way to be very frank to get into any of these roles, because at this point they're actually coming in and looking for people. But if you apply off campus, then you have to make yourself seen. So I think that way getting into these colleges from an undergrad level is fairly easy. But having said that, if you are not able to make it from the directly fresh out of college, there are also lateral opportunities wherein you can apply for these off campuses and get it. But it's not as simple, because mostly how it works for these banks, at least the big banks, is that you need to have a referral in most cases to get into these companies. So for that, there goes a lot of networking that you need to do with people who are already there. For that, you can talk to your seniors, your peers who are in the company, and try to get a referral and then interview for them. And I'm not guaranteeing this theory, but I think even the interviews are slightly more difficult for the lateral guys than it is for the freshers. I'm again not sure about this, but I think the reason for that is because if you're lateral, then you have some work ex, so they probably question you a lot more on that. Then now these are, I think, most like maybe others can add on it, but I think these are the two ways to get into these companies without having any further education. But let's say but if not these two ways, you can also go ahead and do an MBA or an MPhil or any master's program for that matter. And then, then you get a fresh, you start with a clean slate, and these companies, and then, these companies again come to hire from your campuses, and then you again have that opportunity to make it to them. One thing I'd like to mention especially is CA. I think like CAs don't have a campus as such, but I've seen, at least in my firm, there is a lot of preference for this, like the people who are chartered accountants, like they are treated to be at par with a person who has a master's degree. So I believe that CA is also a good way to enter into these, like at least in investment banking. So yeah, I think these are the broad ways. Over to the others if they have anything to add.
Maybe I can go ahead next. So for VC, I mean, I think there's a couple of ways. Of course, like Shubhangi mentioned, you could get into an IB first and then sort of apply through a headhunter, etc., or reach out directly. But I feel like if it is more relevant from the college end itself, there's hundreds of VCs in the country, right? Especially earlier stage VCs. Now, about 20 to 30%. Now, I don't have any backup for this number, but just from the sample set that I know of, about 20 to 30% of them would be willing to hire at least interns, if not full-time analysts. Go to, VC analyst LinkedIn profiles and find out if they've been recruited directly, right? If you reach out to them, because, we do have that privilege in that sense that a lot of people are aware about our college, it might convert into an internship, if not a full-time role. One is that. Two is, of course, consulting in IB. And even if you don't get through a consulting or an IB, it's completely fine. You can go to an alternate. It could be, the audit department or any other department of a Big Four. It could be a startup. It could be any other role. There are still openings into VC. There are examples who have, of just CAs also who've made it to VC funds. So it's just about trying, honestly, in VC or being able to differentiate yourself in some or the other shape. You could start writing a blog, which could have a viewership. It could be just being active on Twitter, etc., writing insightful things, and then sort of putting it on your CV that, hey, I do this, like, why don't you check it out? So anything that gets you noticed in VC, that way, it's a very dynamic process.
P is a very structured hiring, as far as I understand, in terms of where they pick up from. So I think two parts to my answer. One is the direct answer to where the hiring happens from and where we get into. So one is basically moving from a PE/IB role to one of these private equity roles. Can be Indian, can be global, can be sector specific. So each of these have their own kitties to pick up from. But that's one common route. The second common route is directly out of a global MBA or an Indian MBA. Most Indian private equity players pick up from Indian MBA, but the selection ratio is very limited. So that's one. The second thing is directly from a global MBA, you do an internship in a global private equity firm or an Indian private equity firm and then get absorbed. And third is, of course, the lateral hires who get moved from an Indian private equity to a global private equity or vice versa, right? So in that sense, private equity is a very, after an associate level, it becomes a very closed sort of a group where more lateral hires happen than external people coming in. So the endosmosis is not as much. The second thing is, what will you do with this information, right? And my sense is that it's well and good and it's great if you already know that you want to do private equity investing in life, and you can play your chances by taking either of these paths. But my sense is, if you are oriented today towards investing, that's a broader bucket. There are things that you can do which will land you in 4 or 5 of the, so 4 or 5 of the, if I could call it the bullseye, right? The bullseye bucket, you can probably land in either a private equity or a public market investing or a portfolio management part, all of which are similar in terms of the one common theme, which is that it is making money through investments, right? So what can you do with that? Either of these three things will have something in common, like you be acing a CFA or you getting very good marks in college, and generally being really interested, as Arushi mentioned, being interested, opinionated on stocks, on companies, on businesses. So that's, and probably if you are in college, being able to participate in those case study rounds, etc. So if you want, so from this, if you want to take away something, that should be the, my sense, answer that you should take away to get into one of the investing roles. But yeah, if you have certainty that you want to do private equity, then go ahead, go to an IIM and get to a Indian private equity. That's also a way to think about things.
So considering in first scenario, your ultimate, your say, or your immediate near-term goal is getting a job at an investment banking firm. So I think practically speaking, what Shubhangi has said makes absolute sense, because most of the roles that are going to come through your campus placements are going to be back office roles. But the good part is that the back office roles that do come are actually with the global investment banks who have a good, very, very good brand name from an industry perspective. So the natural career transition happens, after you get a job at a back-end setup of any global or an Indian investment bank, doesn't honestly matter. And after you spend around, 1 to 1.5 years learning the actual work over there, is the perfect time for you to actually apply laterally to a front-end position of any investment bank. Now, another situation in this scenario is that if you're unable to land a job, unable to land a back office job from college placements itself, that does not mean that you still can't crack IB. I know a lot of people who have cracked IB after doing, say, pursuing a startup immediately after college, pursuing any other finance role immediately after college. So I think that is definitely not a deterrent. Not being able to crack an IB job immediately after college is not a deterrent for you in order to crack a successful IB job in the future. If the goal is VC, I think the career paths would slightly be different from a VC and PE perspective, is what my experience is. From a VC, the career paths which are definitely going to help you would include consulting and would include some bit of operations role as well as some bit of startup experience. And banking also could be one of the potential avenues. However, I think in my experience, Arushi, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the kind of talent pool that's get taken from consulting and startup ecosystem into VC, I think is more than the kind of talent pools which banking sort of gets into VC. However, from a private equity perspective, I think majority of the talent pool is again consulting and banking oriented. So I think to sort of answer a very practical approach, getting a consulting or a startup job is sort of playing it safe, because these two avenues would sort of pan out a smooth path from a transition perspective to either a VC or a private equity job. But having said that, this doesn't mean that it is completely exclusive to these avenues. This is just what my sense is from my experience, and these are the places which would slightly increase your chance going ahead to get into these industries.
Thank you, everyone. I'm sure that was really helpful to all the attendees. Moving ahead, what opportunities are available to a person looking to exit his/her particular firm, that is, exit options and career switch options?
From an IB perspective, okay, the first fundamental choice would be, do you want to work more or do you want to pursue further education? Within these two, I think the good part is that IB does have a decent track record of still people cracking good business schools from an India and a global perspective directly from investment banks. Obviously, global, fewer precedences, but it's not impossible, is what I'm trying to say. So I think one exit option straight out of IB would be if you decide to go for a further education, be it from a master's perspective or be it from an MBA perspective. I think that would be a very good career transition. The second would be if you wish to further continue. So if you wish to further work for a couple of more years, I think from IB, one of the better career progressions from a more natural career progressions would be making the switch from IB to investing naturally. And within investing, it can either be venture capital, it can either be private equity, it can either be public markets. But having said that, the point I'm trying to take away is that these three avenues are substantial exit potential for any candidate who wants to opt out of an investment bank. So to sum it all up, you can either go for an MBA, you can either do IB, or you can either PE, VC, or public markets.
One thing I would like to elaborate a bit will be on the MBA bit. Like this is what I believe, that for Indian MBAs, I think like if you have a good 1 or 2 year work experience at any good banks, it really helps you. It really adds as a booster, and it's a good pointer to get in. But for a global MBA, what I like after interacting with various people, I think that having a front end experience somewhere plays importance. Like I think if like if you're applying for a global MBA, which really I think at least in US it requires you to have a 4 or 5 year of work experience. Then at that point, if you just have a back end experience, I think it will not be as much, like it will be slightly lower than what than a person who has a front end experience for at least let's say 2 years or so. So I think if somewhere in your mind you have a global MBA in mind, so I think you should be on the lookout to probably move to a front end role, be it in either a front end IB or be it in a PEVC if you get in directly. I've not heard people getting into consulting after like IB, because I think consultings normally have hired directly from campus. So I've not heard a lot of people do that. But I mean, like you should be making a move to a different sort of work experience, which really helps you build a portfolio for the global MBA. Because after 5 years, you waited for the 5 years, and then if your work experience falls short, then you sort of be in a pickle of as to what to do. So I think this is something you should keep in mind if you're thinking of global MBA.
So from private equity, people end up doing either private equity, move to move up the ladder, or move parallel to other private equity firms. The second very popular option is to actually join one of the portfolio companies as in a product or portfolio management sort of a profile, right? So that's the second option that people take. The third, of course, very popular is go do a foreign MBA and come back to private equity or anything else that you want to. That really opens up your revenues. And I think last, which also a lot of people in the private equity of late have started doing is entrepreneurship, wherein you use some of the contacts that you have developed through your investing career and the fact that you've met entrepreneurs, you have worked with businesses, take that to the real industry and deploy some money and try to build your own business. So those are typical exit opportunities that people use.
Thank you, everyone. Moving ahead, how much of a difference will having a post-grad degree specialization make in terms of future prospects?
It's not a hard and fast. For a lot of bigger VCs, you do need an MBA after your analyst tenure to progress in the same fund. There are off chances where you're promoted without an MBA. But I mean, there are funds which will put you on a track role without an MBA as well in VC. So it's not really like a must anymore, at least on the VC side.
Certainly from an MBA perspective, I think when you go for global names, especially investment banks, I completely agree with Arushi now that VCs have now started offering track roles without actually people having an MBA. But I think the situation with banking and private equity is slightly different as per my experience, wherein most of the global bulge brackets, be it investment banks or private equity, have different sorts of role offerings for a pre-MBA versus a post-MBA candidate. So for a pre-MBA, it's usually a contractual role that sort of expires after a tenure of say 11 to 22 months. And then you're expected to go for a postgraduate in the form of an MBA. And then you obviously have a whole new life ahead of you, or you can even choose to come back to the same firm. I think a similar experience or similar situation is also applicable from a private equity perspective, that most of the Ps also have that differentiation that exists from a pre-MBA and a post-MBA role. Therefore, In fact, as Hari mentioned before, the most of the private equities are actually, structured roles run by headhunters. So therefore, there are different specialized programs only for pre-MBA candidates, and it's only after you get a MBA, sort of, you're usually promoted to for a track role. But having said that, exceptions do exist. I'm certainly aware of 2 to 3 banks as well as private equities who no longer have this differentiation. However, from an India perspective, most of them unfortunately do.
At just one point that the answer on this is evolving as the years pass. So I think while you get to that point of doing an undergrad postgrad or not, should do that. You should consider all the factors relating to COVID, what that yields in terms of outcomes for people, etc. Because from the latest batch which has gone and done the postgrad, I think outcomes have certainly been different from what the usual outcomes that we think from these colleges. So I think it's an evolving answer.
I sort of have a slightly different take on this. I believe that the decision to whether do an MBA or an MPhil should not be that is it required for like, I think somewhere it is based on is it required for this job or not. But I think MBA is, I believe, a big decision because you're giving in 2 years of your life for that program. So you need to firstly decide that what your ultimate goal is, and then see then you should probably see if MBA is a way to reach that goal or not. And somewhere like I totally agree with Jaideep and Hari and Arushi that it's not like MBA is not important as such. It's not like a set requirement to get into various roles. But I just feel that it's not a set requirement, but it sort of fast tracks that process. I mean, obviously, I'm not denying that it takes 2 years of your life, but I believe that it does have that fast track effect on it, because a lot of, like Jaideep mentioned, a lot of roles are available for post MBA people, which are not available for the pre MBA guys. So it totally depends on what you want to do in life. If you are hell bent on you want to do a private equity role, you want to really become a partner there or something, then you should probably see what the qualifications of a partner are. If you see all the partners have an MBA from wherever, then I think it is a signal. But if you see that it's not that important, then I think you can go ahead and accordingly decide. So I think it really depends. It requires you to sit down and probably evaluate all the options and then decide, because it is a major decision whether you do an MBA or you don't do an MBA, because there is a timeline for when you can do a particular kind of MBA. Like for an Indian MBA versus a global MBA, there is a timeline for it. So I think that's something which is very personal, and you should really evaluate about it. So yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Moving on to the last question. Do professional courses like CA, CFA, and FRM enhance one's chances of getting an investment banking, private equity, or venture capital offer?
So, like I mentioned before, CA is a well-recognized degree, and they are somewhere kept at par with masters guys, I think. So I believe that CA does, CA degree does play a role in you landing a good job. But again, it's not a requirement. You can be a undergrad from a good college and then you can still make it. Coming to CFA, I think I've not done a CFA, so I think somebody who has that degree will have better insight into it. But I don't think that not doing a CFA has somewhere deterred me from doing my job or for me to be able to understand things. I'm sure a person who has a CFA will be able to understand the concepts faster because they've studied that. But I don't anywhere think that it is requirement. Anyway, it is mentioned that you need to be a CFA in order to get this job, like at least in the IB space. And FRM, I think, is very different. I like FRM itself stands for, I think, risk management. So it's very different from what an IB does. Like there is obviously a risk role, but not like that's not the standard or not the conventional IB, not what we talk about IB in the conventional sense. I think CFA is a lot closer to the IB job than FRM is. Yeah, so I don't think either of these are a prerequisite for IB role. So that's my view.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I absolutely agree with what Shubhanga said. But I think in terms of investment banking, while CA is not a prerequisite or anything, but referencing to the previous question I answered, that within IBs there are usually 2 types of roles. I mean, from a pre-MBA, it's usually a contractual role, And once you have done your MBA, you're sort of offered a sort of a permanent role. But lately, I think more and more investment banks have also started making that differentiation for CAs. I think that was also applicable for my previous firm, investment banking firm, that the CAs were actually treated at par with people who have already done an MBA within only, of course, within that organization. And I think the major reason for that is because the pedigree of those particular firms are actually people who have built the firm after doing a CA. So I think it's very subjective. But having said that, from an IB perspective, I think CA would, I think, slightly add some more value from our overall career progression perspective. But I think from a VC and private equity perspective, I haven't seen that substantial value add happening as of now. But please, Arushi and Hari would have more experience in this answer, though. So please feel free to correct me.
So on P, I think slightly disagree with the answer that Jaideep went to. I think of late, at least, the hiring that we have seen on CA is that most of the firms end up having a separate pool of CA candidates who they want to evaluate, and that in itself is a very good pool to be a part of. And the only point that I would make is that these are rank holders who are being evaluated. Mostly that's the filtering criteria that these companies have, but it's still a very good odd for you to get in, because if you have a so these profiles would, let's say, have 10 to 15 people, and if there are three selections being made, more or less around one comes up from one of these one of these TA backgrounds. So in that sense, I would still say that there is a good value add for a CA degree in private equity roles. Arushi, on VC, you might have.
Sure. So I think what Hari said in terms of the selection criteria is true, that if you have a rank, you have a much higher chance of sort of getting shortlisted. But having said that, none of these courses are a must. A CA would definitely help you get shortlisted, but to be honest, for CA or sorry, for CFA or FRM, I am not sure how much of a value they add in terms of shortlisting. Now, of course, what you do in the interviews, everybody's at par once you've gotten shortlisted. Everything depends upon how you are performing your interviews, and what Shubhangi said around being able to do your job better is also true. I do know that people who have done their CFA do understand the basics of finance a lot better than somebody who hasn't. So yeah, I think that is my take on that. CA is helpful if you have a rank, and the others are helpful just to perform the job.
Thank you for sharing your valuable insights. The chat box is now enabled for the attendees to ask their queries.
How is a master's in finance different from a CFA? I can take a crack. I'm not sure about the answer 100%, but I can take a crack from people who I know have done it to probably answer that. CFA is helpful for a portfolio management type of a profile, wherein you can get through to one of these wealth management funds. That's the core of the CFA subject that you're going to study. And the course is really vast. It really covers everything related to finance and investments. So an MFin is more like a finance-oriented MBA, which will put you in a class of students. One, of course, it will be a class of students where you will be studying with. So it's more like a structured course. It's not just an exam. But how the outcomes differ, I think after a CFA, there is no particular placement which happens. You can use that and use it to improve your chances to get placed in a position. Whereas MPhil will open you up to all the big fours of the world and IB roles as well, if I'm not wrong. At least I have seen a few people come from MPhil courses abroad and to IB jobs. So that's sort of broad difference that I would. I've not seen people pursuing CFA full time. I've seen people pursuing MPhil full time.
there are a couple of questions around internships, the kind of internships for landing in IB jobs. I'd like to take that one. So I think one question is that is the a specific type of internship profile required, and I think the other one is an equity research analyst internship required. So I'll just club these two questions and answer. So firstly, if you're able to land an equity research analyst internship at an undergrad level, that's a great thing, honestly. And definitely it will add a lot of value. I don't know, because see, the CV shortlisting is sort of a mythical process, like it's a mystical process. I don't really know how much it is ranked, how internships are ranked, but I'm pretty certain that in your interview you'll have a lot of valuable insights to give from your experience at at an equity research internship. And same applies for any specific finance, any finance specific internship also, because see what like once you are in the interview room, it really matters to what you're saying, what you speak, and how are you able to impress them. And if you have an experience in that field, it's definitely going to it's definitely going to make a difference, because then they know that they have to train you a little less. Because honestly, when you're going from an undergrad to a job, you know nothing. You are trained from the very scratch. So if you know a bit about it, they know that you'll be able to catch things quickly, and there will be a lot less effort that they have to make on you. But having said that, I think you should really prioritize a profile over the name or the, I don't know, the brand value. Because like I said, what you speak in an internship is more important than what's sitting on your CV. Because if you have like a very good internship but you're not able to justify it, it will not really add a very it will not show a very good picture about it. So I hope that answers the internship questions.
I'll probably take the one on technical skills required for IB. So I think honestly, they're not expecting a lot out of you when they're interviewing at first from the college, right? They do expect you to have done the work for preparing for the interview, and enough guides are available on investment banking, and they honestly cover everything that you need to know for investment banking interviews. So do go for the guides like Breaking into Wall Street and Vault Guide, and some of these which are very easily available on the internet, etc. Apart from that, try and of course speak to people about just being more familiar with what somebody else. And I think this Shubhangi's and Jaideep's insights were super helpful in terms of understanding what goes on in the day. But try and speak the same language, I would say, in a way. If interviewers are able to understand you better, it really helps to convert the role much easier than you would otherwise. So those are some skills to just convert the skill. Of course, on the job, you should really focus on Excel, PowerPoint, like you said. And apart from that, just understanding what WAC means, equity value, enterprise value, all of those things just help you get the job better.
There's a question on what gives you a better exposure for a long-term perspective: front-end role at an Indian bank or back-end IB role at a global bank. See, I think for this, some sort of research needs to be done as to what kind of work you'll be doing. I can speak for a back-end role at a global bank. See, the thing is that the kind of deals that happen in a global bank, in a bulge bracket bank, are at a very high level. Like the deal value is so huge, the stakes are so high. So ultimately, the kind of work that you'll be doing, even at the back end level, like Jaideep had mentioned, are really good. Like, it's not like if you're in a back end role, you're not given good work, or you're given only the grunt work. It's not like that. You actually get an opportunity to work on really good parts of the pitches, which help you develop a greater understanding. And it depends a lot. Although it depends a lot on how much you are willing to learn and how much time you are giving to the job. But if you're really in it for learning, I think even the back-end roles at a good bank really give you a great opportunity to learn. But having said that, if you do get a front-end role at an Indian bank, and if you think that it provides that kind of work, the deals it does, the transactions it does is something that will give you that sort of exposure, I don't see anything wrong in going ahead with that role either.
Can you share your own personal experience while sitting for finance interviews?
Okay, so So for JP, we had like, firstly we had a CV shortlisting, and then we had an aptitude test, and then we had a modeling test. So I think I fared quite well on the CV thing and the aptitude test, but the modeling test was frankly a roller coaster for me, because like I said, I didn't have a lot of background in finance back then. So honestly, the modeling thing was slightly difficult for me. So I think at this place, a lot of people who have that finance knowledge, a CFA, it sort of helps in that. But once you're through with it, in the interviews, I think the interviews are pretty much, I think it's been said a lot of times, but interviews pretty much how you drive it. I have a friend who also got the final offer in JP, who was asked really difficult questions on finance because he had a CFA degree. So he was asked so difficult questions. I think I don't even know the answers to them now. So he was asked those questions and he still made it. But I was not asked anything like that because again, I did not have any such experience prior to that. But I was definitely asked about my economics because like I said, having a good CGPA matters, and they do quiz you on what you've studied in class, just to see that you're actually serious and you didn't just get these marks like by fluke or something. And other than that, I think at an IB, it's very important that you have a learning attitude, because every day you'll be thrown at, like there will be a lot of jargon thrown at you. There will be a lot of new things that will be thrown at you, which you'll not have any idea of how to do. But if you have the right attitude to learn and know that, like, I will do it and try to find out a way, that goes a long way in you succeeding it and completing your job. I think that is what you need to even show in your interview, that you have the right attitude. I think having the right fit is very important for cracking any interview. If you hit that hammer, if you hit that nail, then I think it really doesn't matter what else goes around. At least in these interviews where they don't expect you to have a lot of background knowledge about it. So yeah.
Thank you for the answer. So there's one more question. So when you said that CA provides an upper hand to land the finance jobs in India, so does it stand out for the global finance jobs and roles also, or does CFA takes an edge over there?
Perhaps an MBA would be a sort of a better help than doing a CFA if you want to end up sort of landing a job outside India at a global finance position.
On like CFA, as I said, it's more oriented towards like more like a wealth management profile, and it that's a different side of finance that it definitely helps, and it was a global course. But I have seen people whose CAs have been valued in a global setting as well, because CA is definitely one of the more difficult accounting exams across the, like, in terms of charters that are provided. So it is definitely valued if you have a rank in that, and it does help even for a global role.
And I think one of the specific reasons why CFA may not be as recognized as CA would be the number of CFAs that are applying. Because CFA, like, in order to become a charter, there is like 3 levels that you have to cross, you have to complete, and very few people by the time they're applying for companies, at least from campus, have completed all the three levels. I think having a CFA just basically is a signal that, I'm interested in finance. It sort of screams that, that I'm interested in finance. So maybe they'll be interested more in you. But it's not a prerequisite at all. I mean, it's totally your decision if you want to do that, like if you want to spend that time, that money into doing a CFA. In fact, I've talked to a lot of people who've done a CFA. Even I wanted to know that why are you doing it? Because it does it really help? And for them, I think for most of them, the answer was that, I really like finance, and I would want to have a degree which makes me get a better understanding in the field of finance. So most people don't do it because it will help them in the job, but it's because they like the field and they want to know more about it. I think that's the basic idea of why people do a CFA, like why people go ahead and get a CFA charter. I think.
Moving on, we have a question. While building models, quantifying data is imperative. So how should we develop and train our forecasting skills at the UG level?
I honestly don't think this is required something that you need to do at an undergraduate level. To be very honest, the first job you're going to land if it entails financial modeling, then they are going to ensure that you learn on the job, because that is their job to teach you. And it is not your job in college to demonstrate that I know financial modeling in and out and please take me. That's not you. However, having said that, if you're really enthusiastic about it, I would encourage you to learn Excel. Because to be very honest, I did not, most of the people, at least in our batch, did not know Excel until the third year. So if you're really enthusiastic, perhaps, try being more proficient in Excel, PowerPoint. But again, I'm sure that's not going to help you substantially going forward, because your 6-7 months of the job, the first job, if at all it entails financial modeling Excel, you're going to cover that in the initial probationary period of your job. So I think you can just relax for now.
And to probably put this question to rest, there is a full-fledged training that happens once you join any bank, wherein they teach you whatever you need at the job, and that entails this financial modeling and also Excel. They also have a full-fledged training on Excel, because at a finance job you work on Excel like anything. I think on a daily basis I at least work on 4 different Excels. So you actually work on a lot of Excel models. So that's why, even if you're good at Excel right now, trust me, it may not be close to what you'll be needing while you're working in a full-fledged role, because that over there you not only need to be you don't only need to know all the shortcuts and everything, you need to be really fast at it also. And I think because we don't require to be that fast, or we don't have those sort of assignments at the undergraduate level, we do not develop that skills. But that shouldn't be something that you worry about, because coming from a person who did not know Excel at all, I think you do just fine. Don't worry about it.
When you say people can come from consulting to PE, VC, and IB roles, is this shift only restricted to MBB front-end consultants, or is it easy for niche consulting firms like ZS Associates, etc.? How does a person go about it? Also, what is the back-end to front-end conversion ratio in India? And do people switch to PE, VC directly from back-end?
I can speak about P. I think Arushi can take up the VC part, but I don't think there are many conversions from a back-end role to a private equity role today. But so that's the first part of the question. How do you go from a back-end then to one of these roles? Is to go through to a front-end role and then switch, or go through to some other sort of a profile like an investment banking firm and then switch from there to the private equity sphere. The second part on so I've been a part of McKinsey. I think the difference, the back end to front end conversion ratio from a MCKC to a McKinsey was, if I'm not wrong, about 5 to 10% in terms of the batch that joined. So inevitably, about out of 20 odd people, about 1 to 2 people got through to the front end role. So that's the sort of conversion that we see. That is markedly different in, let's say, a firm called Bain, which I know about. So their BCC to front end conversion ratio has become much better now, is what I hear. And yeah, so I think that's the answer to the question on back end to front end conversion.
I do think it is possible for candidates to crack a private equity job directly from a back-end investment banking job. However, the transition would not be to a global private equity fund. But considering the scenario in India, especially the investing scenario, there are multiple domestic PE shops that are coming up. And for them, the primary talent pool is actually residing at the back-end offices of investment banks. So in fact, you have funds who are performing exceptionally well, such as True North, you have Premji Invest, you have multiples. And these are just the 3 funds which I'm able to point out from the top of my head. And I think I know for a fact that these guys do look at hiring from back-end offices of investment banks.
Agree with Jaideep. So you need to think about it like this, that people who have the most supply will choose the top of the, the cream, whatever, typically in their lens. And then there are tier 2, tier 3 funds, at least in VC, which will absorb people from backend, people from other roles, not just consulting, etc. And even IB Janta mostly goes in the tier 2, tier 3. For me, I mean, I sort of moved to a tier two-ish VC before and then sort of made the move, right? So yeah, I mean, I think you can crack a investing role out of a back end IB or a back end slash mid end consulting as well. Now moving within the within the bank. I do know of one example. So when I was at Barclays, I had a colleague who was working on the back end side, and he apparently did a stellar job um, on his back end role and got his boss to refer him to the front end. And the front end guys interviewed him, found him great, and he actually shifted to the front end. So it's not impossible. It's rare, but it's not impossible. If you put up the fight, things are flexible.
How does switching from a back-end IB to a front-end IB work? How can we increase our conversion chances?
I think specifically just keeping it very short, I think this caters more to the lateral side of interviewing when you want to get conversion from a back-end to a front-end IB role. I think you should first worry about getting a back-end or a front-end role directly out of college rather than worrying, say, something 2 years down the line. But however, I think now since I've already had 1-2 years of IB experience, the focus is now on to judge the level of learning you've had in those 1 or 2 years. So therefore, the interview concept and the overall recruitment process is definitely going to be different. Having said that, the key things you can do to increase the chances just to be very, very comfortable with the deals that you've done during those 1 or 2 years, because that would ultimately form 80 to 90% of the conversation in the interview for any front-end IB role. So I think that is pretty much it. Just know your deals in and out, know the kind of work you've done over the past 1 or 2 years. And secondly, obviously, make sure you structure your answers and present it well, because naturally in the 1 to 2 years that you'll be spending at an IB job, there's going to be a lot of learning that you would be having. And then it's another skill set to actually communicate only the relevant points in that interview process. And I think when it comes to about deal discussions, since there's a lot of content flowing around, that also becomes critical. So therefore, just focus on the deals that you've done.
Thank you, sir, for your answer. So as we come to the end of the session, we would like to thank all the panelists for taking out time from their busy schedules and sharing their valuable insights with us. This session was indeed very enriching, and we hope that it will be beneficial for the batch. Lastly, we would like to thank all the attendees for joining in and hoping that they have a good day ahead. Thank you.